without any further delays, I would like to welcome Xolisa Phillip, independent communications consultant and freelance journalist and columnist and editor, onto the stage. She will be moderating our panel today. And then I'd also like to welcome Jovita Nsoh from Microsoft and Aming from RTESL. They will be participating in our panel today. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session on cybersecurity cybersecurity of energy infrastructure and its role in the energy transition. Without further ado, Anthony has a presentation for us before we start the session.
Okay. Can you bring it up? Can you hear me? Okay. Good morning. Thank you for spending some time to listen to us. What we want to talk about is the role of digitization, digital transformation, as how it will affect Africa, right? And as you know, the topic today is cybersecurity, which is an important part of all of this to make sure everything is secure, safe, compliant, all those good things. So digital transformation is not only about technology, it's about people, it's about process. And the heart of all of it is the data and the information that you need for all those things to come together to give you the results that you need for digital transformation. As you know, it's a system of systems. Every system interacts and interfaces with each other. And at those points where they interact and interface, you could have security problems, right? You need the compliance. You need all these standards to make sure these things happen. You see the buzzwords of the cloud, the cybersecurity, the machine learning, artificial intelligence. This is just giving you an idea of the global, the architecture of how things come together. At the end of the day, as you can see here, we've had attacks, right? And year on year, 6 out of 10 organizations have been attacked. Even the port here has been attacked in the last 2 months, okay? There's an increasing trend to happen in the energy sector, the health sector, okay? Down here, why does it happen? People are not aware that it's happening, right? They're not prepared for these things to happen. So what do we do? Where do we go from here? Some more examples. You remember a few months ago or last year, the Continental Pipeline was attacked in the United States. The whole East Coast pretty much shut down. They couldn't get gasoline for months, okay? Advantech, who creates those boards, they were attacked, $14 million ransom. So now they put a blockchain on the boards to prevent, this happening again. Imagine the nuclear places being attacked. Here's some examples of the types of malicious software that can be used to attack you. There's viruses, there's Trojans. Just give you an idea of what kinds of things are attacking you. So how does it happen? Okay, so you have someone who is interested or an organization. They start to investigate and probe and see what you do or try to understand you, right? And then they try to hook you up and try to get you to become comfortable with what you're doing and what they're doing, right? And then they start to attack. And sometimes you don't even know when they're attacking. They might be on your phone, taking your phone numbers. They might be, if they were in your bank, you would know pretty quick, right? But little things, you don't know, right? And then eventually, once they've got what they've done, they leave and go away. So you don't even know that you've been hacked. So it's very important that we think about these things. So what is cybersecurity? Well, it's all those things, the way to protect yourself from these kinds of attacks. Okay, so it's network security, it's application security, it's information security, it's operational security, disaster recovery, end user education. So it's all these things that make up cybersecurity, okay? How do we fix it, right? First thing is automate your security so that real time something is going on, the system or something knows about it, so they could create a defense to prevent it, right? And then you talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning. Those are some of the techniques to pick it up, so be able to know when something is happening so that you can defend against it. And these are some of the other tools. You talk about edge computing. So you have all these things where you're picking up data, your sensors, like the thermometer might be picking up your temperature, but not just picking up the temperature now, doing your analysis at the edge where that data is being recorded, right? Things like blockchain, instead of using a VPN, where their interfaces, they're blockchain type technology, like they use in the cryptocurrency, where machines are talking to machines to do the cybersecurity, right? So that's another one. Digital twins are these things that, having picked up the data, and you know it's the artificial intelligence, the data is sent to a computer which creates a twin of what's being recorded. So it's saying this sensor corresponds to this in the twin, this sensor corresponds to this in the twin, and then that data analytics is done on it to be able to make decisions. So there's a normal descriptive analytics that you use when you do an Excel sheet. There's predictive analytics, what's going to happen, and there's prescriptive analytics, which says, well, this is happening, this is our standard, this is what needs to happen, and this is what we do when this happens. So then the recommendation is actually prescription is taking place and it fixes the problem. So all of this needs to come together, and you use digital twins to do that. And then when you set up your system, you need to have a full enterprise data management strategy, because the data, remember in that picture, is the blood, is the center of everything that brings everything together. So I mentioned blockchain and VPNs, and today a lot of stuff, interfaces where there's an exchange of a certificate, it's a VPN type of exchange. There are other ways, but this is just one example, okay? And you can see on the left, the intelligent Internet of Things blockchain. Look at how much different, you have remote management of the firewall versus the firewall that's driven by security, right? This is data immutability. You cannot change it, whereas over there you can change the data. So these are some of the things that makes a big difference when you use a blockchain versus a VPN, okay? So at the end of the day, what is the value proposition? We need to be protected. If you think about the outer side, we need to protect ourselves. So we need to embed things like blockchain and other tools, right? We need to be able to predict and prescribe when data comes in what to do, right? And to fix it in the right time, okay? We need to make sure if something happens, it's contained, right? And then we need to always have things in compliance. So how can this help everybody in Africa? Well, people need to know what they need to know when they need to know it. How will that help you become more agile? It will help you to improve your capital efficiency, reduce your costs, all that kind of good stuff. Reduce risk, right? Reduce uncertainty, okay? So you need to be aware when something is happening, all right? And how to avoid those things. So that whole prescriptive analytics to avoid things, so you prevent by being aware and being prepared, okay? And then you may not have heard of Society 5.0 and Industry 4.0 and these things. Well, times are changing, right? So in Society 1.0, it was the caveman with hammers and stuff, right? Today we have cars and all that kinds of good stuff. So there might be a Society 6.0 one day, and I don't know what that is, right? And there might be an Industry 5.0, I don't know what that is, but those things are changing your lives. Look, you have a cell phone. We didn't have a cell phone 10 years ago, right? So how do you adapt to those changes? How do you protect yourself, the things that are coming with those changes, right? So the whole change management. And then it comes back, it's all about people, processes, technology, and the data and information that flows between those. How do you protect that? Questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony, for that wonderful presentation. Without further ado now, we're going to go into the Q&A session with our guests. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Jovita. You know, with the increasing use of digital technology in all facets of infrastructure, the rising risk of malintents as well as malcontents arises. What kind of instances, or how can this space, which involves critical infrastructure, how can players decrease their risk as well as mitigate the onset of attacks when they do arise?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tony, for that speech. First of all, let's define critical infrastructure, right? The issue that we have is that there is an increasing convergence of the physical world with our cyber world. And because of that, there is increasing reliance of the things that we depend on for safety, for life, on cyber. For example, electricity, water, our transportation system, the financial system, energy, well, electricity is part of energy, right? Those are part of the critical infrastructure. So for us to actually start protecting critical infrastructure, we want to understand what they are. And then the second thing is to understand the types of attacks that happen. Traditionally, we view attacks as something from the outside in. We forget about internal actors. But as the world converges into this, you saw Tony just talked about Industry 4.0, which is, people call it, the fourth industrial revolution, which is this convergence of our cyber and the physical world, otherwise known as IoT. We now there is imperative for us to build not only the understanding, tracking, analyzing, and reporting on all these systems, but to also devise solutions that can actually respond to attacks. So what are the types of attacks? We have nation-state attacks, where some nations try to compromise other nations or other large companies. Obviously, we have script kiddies, people who may be carrying out attacks for fun. And that is where we focus a lot of our energy. But we do forget also internal attackers. So to me, to build a comprehensive cyber program, which is the key word there, program, you want to take all facets of your operations. You understand the different attack vectors, right? And then you build a program that actually addresses those different vectors.
Anthony, would you like to also chip in on that question before we move on to the next one?
Yeah, he's repeated a lot of the stuff that I would have said. So, but the key, as he said, is to know what you need, what you have to deal with, right? To really understand the vectors, the components that are making up the things that you need, and make sure that those things are being protected, right? So your HVAC system, for instance, is that being protected? Is your people coming through your organization, are they being protected? It's not just equipment, right? It's people, process, and technology. Okay.
All right. And then from a strategic point of view, what methodologies can power and energy leaders create to develop security-minded plans to address issues of location, neutralizing threats, as well as minimizing new attacks from possible vector points?
So, good question, by the way. Situational awareness is key. Just to continue along the same lines, we are taking a principled approach to security whereby we assume that we've already been compromised, right? That is the first mindset that you want to assume. Just assume that you're already compromised. That is called zero trust. When you come from a mindset of a zero trust network, you are then going to build in processes and procedures in place to vet control, respond every single connection that comes into or out of your network. Now, that includes behavior from, where the attack is coming from, who the attacker is, what their intent is. But I was talking with Tony this morning, and we said, listen, we spend a lot of energy trying to track people who are opportunistic in what they are trying to accomplish. And we sort of let the real attackers go under the radar. And the example that I gave him, if you look at Africa, for example, to be more relevant to where we are, a lot of the PSAs, the profit-sharing agreements, are between African countries and IOCs, International Oil Operations. And what usually you see in the PSA is that the custodians, the African countries who own the land and the oil, have no insight into the actual production per day. So if you ask, the example I was discussing with Tony is, if you ask any African country, most of them, how many barrels of oil do you produce per day? They're going to tell you, the example he gave me was 50,000 barrels a day. And I asked him, I said, where do you get the data from? It is reported to you by the operator. So the example, I responded to him, I said, that's so nice, that's brilliant. I can go to my electric company and tell them how much electric I've consumed in a month. And I tell them I owe you $10, right? They're going to depend on me being honest all the time. So what are we trying to protect? We want to have revenue guarantees, so our financial systems are not compromised. And then you keep wondering, why are African countries poor when they have all this wealth? But then the question is, okay, who reports oil production? So if we can start from a governance standpoint at the base layer, where we say that we want to have visibility into everything that we own, a shared visibility, whereby an oil-producing company is not sending you an Excel spreadsheet of monthly production numbers, but you can actually look into the OT, the underlying operation technology infrastructure, and see that, so that you can have that shared visibility of your meter, right? We all have our electric meter at home, water meter at home, where we can read and see how much we're consuming. So we want to have that kind of visibility.
Anthony?
Yeah. Just to follow on that example, today there are real-time operating systems that report that exactly right from the sensors. So as we said, if systems can be put in place for the governance and the processes, that when that data comes in, it comes real-time to where it needs to go, then you would have more accurate data, right? And it's available today. The operators use it for themselves, and it's for as he said, the governments. If the local companies get that data themselves, they could be trained in the processes. They could be trained to use that data to efficiently do the reporting that is needed to do that properly. Not only for production data, it could be you're drilling a well and you're looking at the efficiency of a well. If that well is going to blow out, all of that could be done real time today, and it's available, and that's what we could bring to these African countries.
Speaking of that, do you have real-life examples of improved supervisory control methods?
Correct. So let's start from upstream, where you have an E&P, exploration and production. For those who may not be from the oil sector, the oil sector is comprised of 3 different phases: upstream operations, midstream. Upstream is usually exploration and production. Midstream is pretty much going to have your storage and transportation systems. And downstream is going to be refining and marketing. So at the upstream level, and the problems are different at each stage of the value chain, which may require us to have several sessions to cover all the different risks security challenges that abide, right? So let's take upstream, for example. Upstream, you typically have drilling operations, and that's what really happens there, post-exploration. And when we talk of drilling, you have the oil rigs, you have flaring, you have all the different operations that happen offshore. It is conceivable that someone could inject a malicious process into a drilling operation and cause an explosion. We've seen that happen in some parts of the world. Midstream, typical attack vectors is going to be on the pipelines, where you could see people attacking the piping operations or storage locations. We've seen and provided solutions for sensoring, sensor meters. Some people use drones, but you can't have drones along thousands and thousands of miles where there's no connectivity. So how do you secure that? It's really impractical for some of the use cases. And then now you go down to refining. What happens? In the typical refinery, you're going to have what we call, from an OT standpoint, different levels of the Purdue model. And at the base layer, you're going to have your actuators, your sensors, your process, your PLCs, and all those at that layer zero is where we've seen attacks happening, because for me to attack and bring down any infrastructure, I don't need to normally go into the servers. What I could do, as Tony mentioned a short while ago, is to manipulate some of the underlying core infrastructure that drive that environment. For example, the heating system. If I know that the standard operating temperature of this room is, 72 degrees centigrade Fahrenheit or 21 centigrade, and I crank it up to 300 degrees, how do you think you guys are going to feel? Right? So I could do that and take you guys out rather than trying to come in here and attack you, which is going to be difficult because I have to go through a whole bunch of guards. So as we think about security, we want to shift our ways of thinking to say that an attacker doesn't necessarily need to go into a server to take it out. It could attack the grid, it could attack the power system, or it could actually bring down the cooling system, and you are also will achieve the same results.
Over to you, Anthony.
Can you repeat the question?
Okay, so the question is about improving supervisory control.
Okay. So the whole idea of monitoring real time or at the right time is very important. And being able to do that, and he's talking about maintenance and these things, so that let's say we're drilling a well, right? Or you have a piece of equipment that's working in the field, a pump that's working in the field. You want to be able to not shut down that pump at very long periods of time, right? So if you could monitor the activity of the pump, how fast the pump is pumping, how much it is pumping, how many hours that pump is pumping before, and you know that maintenance has to be done after 500 hours at this rate and all that good stuff. So things like maintenance can be done by understanding the behavior of the equipment or the units, and doing that at a time that you reduce and optimize the downtime and save a lot of efficiency.
So can I add something there? So when we hear supervisory control in an OT environment, what that really means is, and the word there is usually SCADA, supervisory control and data acquisition systems, right? The reason why this question is coming up is because that is the actionable part of an OT infrastructure, where the supervisor can actually control processes, right? It is different from an operations control where you can only view parameters, but you cannot control it. So it is critical that we secure all our SCADA systems, right? Those supervisory control and data acquisition systems, so that the production processes that underlie our operations can operate at required and optimal parameter. But why though? Because the key in all of this environment is safety. So in a typical ICT infrastructure, people care about confidentiality, integrity, and availability of their data. In a lot of the environments where these companies that you see back here operate, the first thing that everyone cares about is safety. And if SCADA systems do not operate under optimal conditions, safety is compromised. Thank you.
All right, thanks for that, Dr. Jovita. Now, moving on to Africa, the situation here on the continent in terms of digital transformation and security. How can we, as a continent, considering the fact that there are all these possibilities in terms of energy and the future of energy on the continent, as we transform digitally, how can we ensure that we embed some of the best practices that our peers in the West and in the Far East have adopted in order to ensure that we not only miss the curve, but we're also quite ahead when it comes to protecting our resources?
Yeah, so NJ likes to say that if you are not at the table, you will be on the menu. And we've seen that a lot with standards and industry best practices where you go across Africa, they are using either an ENISA standard. ENISA is the European Union standard, or NIST, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology out of the USA, and they try to shoehorn it in a continent which is different. I talked to Tony earlier on how the African Union has an outdated ICT charter. It's completely outdated. If you apply it, you're already defeated, right? So we need to go back to the AU and say, sit up and work, do some work. Develop African-based standards that are applicable to the continent. I'll give an example. Today in the continent, when I travel from across 3 countries, I'm going to end up with a whole bunch of change currency-wise, which I cannot use once I'm back home. And that already has devalued a bunch of the money that I already had when I took off from my home. From a cyber standpoint, why can't they develop what we already have in Europe, which is known as the Internet Exchange, right? So that once you move from one country to the other, you could actually benefit from the connectivity that we already have. So as a continent, I would strongly, strongly recommend local content when it comes to standards. That's how simple it is. And we can do it. We have the brain power, we have the will, and we want to make sure that we are not on the menu.
Any thoughts, Anthony?
So I was involved in invoicing in my past life. And as he said, when you go to Europe, they have certain standards that you got to follow. When you go to the US, they have certain standards you have to follow. Well, here, like he's saying, every little country has a different standard. Some follow Europe. Well, Africa needs to unite, and I'm hearing that everywhere around. So you need to unite so that you guys are following similar or one standard, right? That will save you a lot of money. It will save you a lot of time, a lot of headache and inefficiency, because if you operate across these boundaries, that means for each organization, each country, you have to do different things, right? For instance, in Brazil, when you cross a county, they have different standards for taxing. And so this is huge, especially as an operator or an oil company. Anybody operating cross-border, standards really, really impact you, okay? So.
All right, and then as we wrap up this panel, I'd like to get your final thoughts, Dr. Jovita, as well as Anthony. I'm not sure if maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience, if you're interested. All right, nobody's taking up the offer. We've got 2 fantastic speakers. Anyone? No? Okay. Dr. Jovita.
My final thought is that Africa and Africans should continue to embrace digital transformation. And we should be bold enough to localize it, to inject our own thinking and ethos into everything that we do. But because this is a cyber forum, we should also always think about security. I like the premise and the content that Mr. Tony provided. And I would strongly encourage you to maybe ask for a copy of his deck and try to inject some of the recommendations that he provided into your operations if you are either part of an organization, but as individuals also be wary of social engineering that you saw on his deck. That's how simple it is.
Thank you, Dr. Jovita. Anthony.
So society and industry 4.0 and 5.0, you see, is here. It's not coming, it's here. And that means there's a lot of change taking place. And it's very important you become aware of what those changes are and how it's affecting you and how it's going to affect the business, how it's going to affect your families. It's personal. It's not just organizational, right? So it's very important. And we would like to help. Like that presentation was an awareness presentation, so you know what's there so that you could react, right? Or predict and prevent things from happening to you, okay? So that's the key. It's not just reaction, but prevention. Become agile to things that are happening, and so that you know what's going to happen or when it's happening, so you could respond to the things and prevent things, etc. Okay.
All right, that runs off our conversation this morning. Thank you, Dr. Jovita, and thank you, Anthony, so much
You're welcome.
for the enlightening conversation. Thank you to our audience as well.
Thank you so much.
Good morning.
Thank you.